Welcome to another thrill-packed edition of Unite, i.e. Radio, the radio show for the most important political office, that of the private citizen. My name is Greg Brittain with the Redlands Tea Party Patriots, and I'm joined in studio by my co-host, Don Dix. And we have a very special guest we're going to introduce in just a minute, and we'll be talking later in the show about the election results on March 3. And our guest here is from China, has an amazing story. And just by way of maybe of background, is for as long as America has been a country, until very recently, China has been weak and poor. But you're looking back over the last 5,000 years of human history, that's very atypical. For most of that time, China has been the or one of the leading countries and civilizations in the world. So what we're seeing now in various manifestations that we'll talk about is the reemergence of China to its natural position in the world, and whether that ends up being for good or for ill remains to be seen.
I think the answer lies somewhere in China's history since the late 50s, early 60s, when a program that's called, interestingly enough, the Great Leap Forward was instituted by Chairman Mao. China's history takes a right-hand turn at that moment. But there's also another important part of this story, Greg, and it played out in part in the election cycle that we're having right now, the rise of Bernie Sanders, buoyed by students to a large degree who believe that and have been indoctrinated to believe that somehow socialism is the answer for all of America's problems. And they have this twisted version of history that doesn't give them an accurate understanding of what actually has unfolded in countries like China with this great leap forward, the huge toll of human suffering and death, upwards of 30 million people that were killed in order to institute, as you said, this industrial revolution. We don't understand the cost in terms of suffering that totalitarian regimes inflict on their people. The history isn't properly taught in academia. As a result, the students are now backing this, what is now a watered-down version of socialism, but we all know where that road leads. And that's why I'm excited also for this guest, because she has an inside view of what the cost is of a totalitarian communist regime when the state takes over the means of production and institutes these draconian forms of regulation and silences dissent.
Yes, our guest, Jennifer Zeng, experienced what you talked about personally and is fortunate to have escaped it and come to America, and now, unfortunately, now she's in the studio with us, but she'll survive that. If she can survive the Chinese labor camps, she'll survive being on our show today. She grew up in China, steeped in the indoctrination, believing in the Communist Party until she ran afoul of it and experienced what you were talking about. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Actually, when I heard you talk about China's history and the rising of China, I'd like very much to stress one point. The China, I think, before the Chinese Communist Party and after is very different. It's different Chinas. So as far as I can see, today's China and Chinese people is some kind of adopted by the Chinese Communist Party, that the communist ideology that comes from Germany, it's not part of traditional Chinese culture, and so it's not part of the real China we once know in the history, the benign China. So now the whole nation, the whole people is took, I think, hostage by this evil party coming from Germany. So we should be I think, treat these two different versions of communist China and traditional China, and to see the real beautiful Chinese culture that has been inherited for 5,000 years. I think the Shenyun performing arts is giving a very, very good example. It's now, I think, spread throughout America, I think, including California and I think in Phoenix, many different cities. That's portray and give us a little bit of glimpse of what the real Chinese culture once was in the history and how the Chinese Communist Party has damaged the China and brought China to this, I think, very critical, dangerous state where it has become a threat, not only to Chinese people itself, but to the entire world.
Why don't you start by telling us your story, and then we'll expand on how that relates to the larger picture of what the Communist Party is doing in and to China.
Yes, like you said, I was born in China in 1966. That was the year when the Great Cultural Revolution started. So my family, because my father was an intellectual, so got very badly persecuted during Cultural Revolution. So our entire family were relocated in a very small town which had only 30,000 population. And I had a very lonely and isolated childhood there. And then I grown up. And then, after the Cultural Revolution ended, the party, I think the economy of the country was at the very brink of total collapse. So it had to adopted a so-called openness and reform to the West, so to save their own economy. So after that, I think we see some kind of economic development, and people were assuming or were expecting that the economic development will bring real freedom and real democracy to China. Many people, I think, elites in West, also policymakers also believe that. And then I was admitted to one of the top universities in China. So I felt I was doing very well. I even was admitted into the Communist Party. I became the first Communist Party members in my class when I was in my university.
Wow.
So up till then, I think like many young Chinese students or young Chinese people, I believe that the party somehow was the savior of China. Although our family suffered, but my parents never told me anything about their political opinions. I think it's not safe to talk about your public opinion or political opinion.
Even between parents and their children.
No.
That's amazing.
Because during Cultural Revolution, young children, students were encouraged to report their parents, their teachers to the government. So if you report, your parents, your teachers are discussing the political matter or saying something bad about Mao Zedong, your parents got rounded up, got persecuted by the party, and the young students believed they were doing a good thing. So in my family, also, I learned all this after I think I was already more than 30 years old. My mom, I started reading history, and then I didn't know what's really happened during Cultural Revolution. So when I was in university, I really had no idea at all of what this party had done to China. Because I grown up in this communist China, all our textbooks and everything we saw, we heard told us how marvelous this party was. If it's not for great leader Chairman Mao, we would be suffering an old evil society till today. We would be suffering this and suffering that. So we're terrified. Without the party, our China would be go to hell. So that's what we believe.
What strikes me about what you're describing is, to a degree, what we begin to see happening in academia, where there's this perverted history that's being taught right now, both about America's founding as well as, regimes like this. But what you're describing is the indoctrination that the government is your salvation. Without a government, without Chairman Mao, without the things that were done during what's called the Great Leap Forward, you're calling it the Cultural Revolution, the people are left to think that they will be somehow lost, damaged, have no way forward. It's exactly the opposite here. We're taught to be strong individually. Strong and rugged individualism is what takes care of. We were taught. And that's the strength of America. It just, as you were describing it, that stark contrast just emerged to me about the way that the government makes you feel dependent on them in China versus the way that America was built. Rugged individualism. We're responsible for ourselves and our own and caring for ourselves.
Right. And we have the freedom to pursue happiness as we each define it.
But we want to pick up your story with your imprisonment in 4 different times in Chinese labor camps because you adopted a belief system, a spiritual belief system that was not on the approved list of the Chinese government. Tell us a little bit about how that happened. What was it like? Share with our listeners, what is it actually like to be in one of these labor camps? What happens? And in fact, you were tortured. And if you're comfortable sharing with us a little bit about that.
Yes, I think to sum it up, it's a living hell on earth. On the first day when I was sent to the camp, the first sound I heard is the cracks of the electric batons and then an order to squat down. So from that moment on, for more than a month, at any minute when we were awake, we were to squat down and our eyes were lowered to look at our feet. We were never, ever allowed to raise our head. When we were talked to the police, we need still to looking at our feet any time, any minute in the day. So for the first day in the camp, we were forced to squat with our 2 hands, holding our heads and our heads lowered, our eyes looking at our feet, and squat like that motionlessly under the baking sunshine for 15, 16 hours.
In that same position for 15 hours straight?
Motionlessly. So many elderly ladies couldn't hold up, so they fainted away. As soon as somebody passed out, they applied electric batons on that person to wake her up so that she could continue to be held in that position. And from the second on, every day for 16 hours, we were forced to stand motionlessly inside the cell with our 2 hands, in front of our body, and also our heads lower down looking at our feet. And for 16 hours, we were required to recite out very loudly and very insulting regulations of the camp, like you promise you won't do nasty things, you won't steal people's money, all these are very insulting regulations they made for the real criminals, not for people like us. We were there for our spiritual belief in truth, compassion, and forbearance. We didn't commit any crime. So 16 hours recite out loud the very, very insulting things. So I felt my mind was constantly being raped by those insulting regulations. And at one point, I felt I could not go on at all. I would go crazy at any moment. So I asked the police for a piece of paper and a pen to write an appeal against my labor camp decision, because for ordinary person, if you are given a sentence or a labor camp decision, you are allowed to appeal against that to some kind of higher administrative bodies. But for Falun Gong practitioners, we were denied this opportunity because my father was a top 10 lawyer in Sichuan province, so I knew my legal rights. I asked for a piece of pen and a piece of paper and pen. And as soon as the police officers heard this, they dragged me from the cell into the courtyard. They dragged me all along and then threw me on the ground and applied electric batons to all over my body and until I lost my consciousness.
Was there something that they wanted from you? If you do X, repent, given information, whatever it is, then the torture stops? Or was this really, there was no out? It was there The physical and psychological torture was there to break you.
Yes. At first, on the first day, I think the police told us the purpose for us being brought there is very clear, is to have us reformed, which means to have us give up our beliefs in truth, compassion, and forbearance. So they promise, if you write up a guaranteeing statement to say we will not, practice Falun Gong anymore, we will listen to the party, they promise they will release you right away. So if you sign a paper, they will treat you well. So that's what they promise. So, but because for me, truth, compassion, and forbearance is part of my life, I don't think I wanted to go against that. So I didn't promise anything. So I tried to withdraw all the torture for 6 months.
So this first imprisonment was 6 months long?
No, not 6 months now. It's 1 year. My labor camp sentence was 1 year. I said I tried to withdraw this for 6 months.
I see.
And then in October 2000, I suddenly, because after I witnessed so much unimaginably inhumane crime against humanity, I felt that was worse than the Nazi concentration camp I read in the history book. I suddenly developed a very strong impulse to write a book about what I experienced, what I saw as a record. Somehow I feel it's my historic responsibility to write a first-hand account, to really document what's really happened behind the walls of the labor camp. And then I was suddenly faced with a dilemma. If I did not do what the police want me to do, I will never ever be released. Even if I served my 1 year sentence, they will just slap me another one. 3 year, 5 year, very easy, because labor camp is supposed to be an administrative system, punishment system, so you don't have to go to the legal system. You are denied a lawyer, there's no trial, and also it's an administrative system. A party member can just write up a sentence to you. So if I don't reform, I would never be released. But if I reform, I have to do what the labor camp police required me to do. So it's not as simple as you write up a statement to say you will give up. You are also expected to write long articles to criticize your own belief system. And then you need to read out this long article in front of all the prisoners in the camp and have that video recorded as evidence of your reform. And then you have to help the police to torture your fellow Falun Gong practitioners to prove you have been reformed well enough. Otherwise, they still don't feel confident with releasing you.
When you say you had to help, what did you have to do in terms of torturing your fellow practitioners to get out?
For example, I think from October 2000, the police found out a very effective way to torture or to force Falun Gong practitioners to so-called reform, that is sleep deprivation. So any newcomers to the camp were not allowed any sleep at all until you collapsed, unless you signed a document. So when I was in the camp, I knew the longest period a woman held up was for 15 days, 15 nights, no sleep at all. And after I released, there was a longer period, a longer record created by someone, she's in New York now, called Zhang Yijie. She was not given any sleep 42 days and 42 nights. So because to keep somebody awake, they have to have some people like in rooster, like they have 3 shifts to make sure you keep that person awake. If she fell asleep, just beat her up or just keep her awake. So they ask you to do that part of job, to keep those unreformed Falun Gong practitioners awake so that they don't sleep until they collapse.
We'll tell in our second segment, second part, which will be broadcast next week. We'll go more into your story. We only have about 2 minutes left before the hard break here. Another part, and you were fortunately able to escape it, is the Chinese organ harvesting program where people are prisoners, such as yourself, their organs are involuntarily taken, and that may even kill them.
Yes.
To sell to people, other Chinese or other maybe non-Chinese, that are willing to pay for them.
Yes.
Tell us about that. We got about a minute and a half left in this segment, and how you escaped that fate.
I was given blood test in the camp and two very thorough physical examinations. I told the doctor, which is true, which was the case. I had hepatitis C before I practiced Falun Gong. That was part of the reason why I started practicing Falun Gong. And I saw the doctor recorded very carefully about everything I told him. I didn't know what the purpose of the physical examination. Then I thought it was just an ordinary physical exam, but later on, after I learned that so many people were killed for their organs, I realized that could be the reason why I escaped the fate of becoming a victim of forced organ harvesting.
We've been visiting with Jennifer Zeng, who escaped the communist China and is in America now to really alert America to the threat and the danger of China.